All right, what's going on? Drive time, Monday afternoon, 11 minutes past the hour of 2 o'clock. It is very warm today. It is very hot. It is about 93 degrees and sunny. It's a warm day. It's going to be a very warm week, kind of the dog days of summer. Happy Monday to you. Hope you had a great weekend, and as it is every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Spence Checketts back behind the mic. I was out last Thursday and Friday after a very busy Tuesday and Wednesday in Dallas for Big 12 Media Days. Had a good time down there. That's a heavy lift, 8 hours of live radio, back-to-back days, but good to have Sean by my side, Sean O'Connell. And I want to remind you that any of the sound you may have missed from Media Days, University of Utah, BYU, and others, ESPN700sports.com is where you go if you're pining for more college football conversation after a massive, massive couple of days down in Dallas. But it is great to be back in front of this microphone on this Monday afternoon. Hope you had a great weekend. Happy Monday to you. The Vegas Summer League rolls along. The Utah Jazz and several other teams have decided to load management. Summer League. Cooper Flagg has been shut down. We don't know if Ace Bailey is going to play again. He did not play last night. Neither did Walt Clayton Jr. The Jazz are playing the Spurs tonight. We'll see if Dylan Harper goes, but we have some Summer League action. And we are inching closer and closer to fall camp in the world of college football. But we're going to do a little something different today. Last Wednesday, we lost Frank Layden at the age of 93, the legendary Jazz head coach, NBA Executive of the Year, Coach of the Year in 1984. And quite frankly, that's like 2% of the measure of the man, pillar in our community, father, husband, friend to many. And the timing of everything was very unfortunate because I was not on air the day after Frank passed, nor was I able to attend the services over the weekend. My father was there. Some family members were able to attend, but I was officiating a wedding in Los Angeles, actually in Dana Point, but I could not tap out of that. So I'm going to dedicate today's show to Frank's memory. So we're kind of throwing out the rundown, and we have a great guest list on tap. We're going to start things off with Phil Johnson. Coming up at about 2:30, Phil, of course, was Frank's assistant and then went on to become Jerry's assistant. Phil himself was a head coach and a Coach of the Year winner, a great, great offensive mind. So we're going to bring in Phil right off the bat. Frank's son, Scott Layden, will join us. And for those of you that know Scott, you know it's a big, massive coup to get him on the show. So he's going to stop by later on. My father, Dave Checketts, will stop by, and then Ron McBride, former head coach of the University of Utah football team, and then Richard Smith live in the studio. Phil Johnson, Smitty, Scott Layden, Dave Checketts, me, Spence Checketts, all of you, the great listeners, Coach Ron McBride, and that young man, Porter Larson, on a Monday afternoon. Happy Monday, buddy. How we doing?
Happy Monday to you. What up, what up? How are you? How was your trip?
So,
first of all,
you know, maybe we'll do some story time later. I got to say, I speak for a living, and I've done it for 20 years, and I have addressed groups, and I've emceed dinners, and I've hosted roundtables.
You have?
I was stunned at how nervous I was to officiate a wedding.
Okay.
It really caught me off guard. Like
it's probably a unique pressure.
I didn't feel nervous, and I prepared. I wrote my script. I went over the thing like 4 or 5 times. In Orange County, there are specific pieces of legalese you have to intertwine to make sure you say the right thing at the right time. And then as the ceremony, I walked out there first because star of the show, whatever, no big deal. And as I'm standing there, I see some family, see some friends, feeling good.
What was your walkout song?
Well, I didn't really choose it. It was whatever their wedding song was. I believe it was, some sort of love song. I don't even remember. But I'm standing there. Wedding party walks up. Bride and groom stand there. And then I need to launch into dearly beloved, we're here, blah, 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 blah. And my hands started shaking. I didn't, my body had this visceral reaction, like fight or flight, dude. It was weird.
And you're usually sitting down doing a show.
That's fair. And also in a studio with nobody around.
Yeah.
And to have hundreds of people to address. I don't know, different. Man. It kind of caught me off guard how nervous I was.
There's a part of radio where you stop talking to the listener and you just start talking to the mic and you just start, doing it. You stop thinking about the audience. That's different when they're staring at you and it's the biggest moment of two people's lives.
Yeah.
I get it. But as you mentioned earlier, throwing out the rundown, only a few people on the planet I would do that for. Frank Layden's one of them.
Absolutely. So today's show is all about the life and the memory of Frank Layden. Without Frank, I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that there is no Utah Jazz. So Phil Johnson will be our first guest via phone, but joining me live in studio, good enough to do this for the next 4 hours or so, someone who has a unique perspective on not just Frank, but the Layden family, the legacy, and the life of Frank Layden. one of, if not the best friends to that family, Richard Smith, live in studio. Smitty, happy Monday, man. How are you?
Spence, good to be with you, and excited for this day. I'm predicting that this ends up on your podcast show on the website, ESPN 700 website, in the future as the best show of the year. I'm predicting that right now because this guest list you have and the stories that I'm going to predict are going to start flowing and coming out is going to be a great moment for ESPN 700. I'm excited that you and Porter decided to do this, and this is a great opportunity to honor one of the true legends in our community.
And I don't have to tell Porter this, but I'm going to remind him on air. Our bumps today will all be Frank Sinatra. I know he's already on that.
Yep.
As we bring all these guests in. So, Smitty, let's start with, as I referenced, the timing, of course, of these things, it's never great. And certainly none of this is about me, but I had an obligation over the weekend that I could not tap out of, so therefore I was not able to attend the services. So we'll get into Frank's life, his legacy, story time. But tell us, talk to my father. We're going to bring him on later. How were the services? Kind of take us behind the scenes.
The services were great. It was a quick turnaround. Frank passed away on Wednesday midday, and a decision was made by the family. It would be best to do a service as quick as they could try and organize one, which ended up being on Saturday morning at 11 o'clock at the Cathedral of the Madeleine here in downtown Salt Lake City, which, by the way, those who were not able to attend or would be interested in viewing the service, it actually is the whole service video online on YouTube. You can just go to YouTube and just type in funeral service of Frank Layden, and it'll pop up, and you can watch the whole service. But it was a beautiful, beautiful morning. A lot of people came. Spence, you're not the only dignitary who couldn't make it on such short notice. Chris Hill, who wanted to be there, is on a 50th anniversary cruise with his wife Kathy. Frank's good friends Chris Lino and Colleen Lindstrom are back east at a family gathering in New York. Dave Fredman, who certainly would have been there, was an early jazz guy from the day one, and he's in a family obligation in Southern Illinois, and so people are spread all over the place. Ron McBride made it. He was at Mac. We'll talk about later, but he was at a wedding in Cincinnati on Friday afternoon. Got up at 4 a.m. Saturday morning, 6 a.m. flight to Salt Lake, comes to Frank's services, comes to the celebratory lunch in the afternoon. After that, goes home, takes a quick nap, gets up the next day on Sunday, flies to Hawaii to work at a football camp where he is this week. And that's the dedication that people have when they want to honor somebody like that. And Coach Mack made all that effort just to make sure he was here. And he's the one who texted me earlier to say, hey, Vicky just texted me and said, you guys are doing a show about Frank this afternoon. What time am I on?
Oh,
and
awesome.
I said, okay, Mac. I said, let me check with Spence, and I'll get right back to you.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of friends Frank has.
Yeah.
And that's the legacy he has, and that's what hopefully we're able to honor today.
And I do have to say thank you, Smitty, to you, because we have Phil Johnson, Scott Layden, Dave Checketts, Ron McBride today. But you sent me a list of about 20 names that I forwarded on to my producer and Dynamite show booker, Porter. And so this week we will intersperse the Dave Allreds, the Jay Francises, the Dave Fredmans of the world. And, we'll do that next week as well. So it's not just going to be today, but today is all about Frank. For our listeners' context, Smitty, what's the origin story? When did you first meet Frank Layden? When did you first become connected to the family? Let's kind of get some context on just how unique the relationship is that you have with Frank and Scott and the entire family.
Yeah, well, mine's very, very different, and everybody has a different path and a different story, right? I'm in graduate school in Connecticut. I'm working as a graduate assistant at Central Connecticut for my college coach there. I get a job offer at the University of Utah because I'm studying a graduate program in higher education administration. I've been doing some stuff on the basketball side at the school, and so I go to see my Coach Bill Dietrich, longtime venerable New England coach, to say my goodbyes. I'm moving out west. He says, hey, when you get out there, get settled, you should go see my friend Frank Layden. He just got the job as the general manager of the Utah Jazz. And I said, oh, great. Now, this is in May of 79. Well, the Jazz were still in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. And so at that moment, as I'm speaking to Coach Dietrich, I'm trying to figure out a way to tell him that, well, Salt Lake City and New Orleans aren't exactly next door to each other, And then I said something, to that extent to him, and he said, no, you don't understand. I just talked to Frank the other day, and he told me that they're going to make an announcement that the team is moving to Salt Lake. And then he leaned forward, Spence, for emphasis across his desk and said, don't tell anybody. Mm-hmm. And so I said, wow, okay. So that happens. I move out here. I'm not going to go see Frank because I don't want to bother him because there's a million people after him. The team's moved here, and everybody's, quote, after a job. And then my coach sends me a handwritten note in October of that year. Hey, hope it's going well in Utah. Make sure you go see Frank Layden and tell him I sent you. Maybe he can give you a job as a part-time scout or something on the side. Okay, so I reluctantly go to see Frank because I'm thinking I don't want to bother him, but at the same time, I want to honor my coach who has made a couple of efforts to connect us. So I go see Frank, and we meet, and nothing happens of that. But a couple of years later, he takes over as coach. He hires Scotty, who comes out to help him. Scott and I start running in the same circles up at the University of Utah, pick up basketball guys, and we start connecting and become friends through that. And then he decided he wanted to ask me if I would do some part-time stuff for them on the game nights, and then doing some video stuff, and then doing some scouting stuff, and then it all started, piling up one year after another responsibility, another thing. Can you do this? Can you do that? And all that kind of stuff. And I did that for 13 years on a part-time basis, and never thinking it was going to be anything else. I was just doing it to help out my friends, and the people became my friends, who were Frank Layden and Phil Johnson and of course Jerry Sloan, and then in '95 they said they wanted to create a new position as a video coordinator and a college scout, and do you want to come and do that full time? Wasn't sure I wanted to do it, but my wife kind of convinced me, hey, you should try it, and you can always go back to higher education and get another job, whatever, but this is probably a one-shot deal to work in the NBA. And I said, that makes sense. And Scotty was saying the same thing. So I kind of took that leap of faith, and it ended up snowballing into 27 years and, working full-time. But over the span of the life of my relationship with the Jazz and the Layden family, ended up going from 82 basically to 2022 with the Jazz. And a 40-year career working with the Jazz. And, of course, my relationship with the Laydens obviously much further past the relationship with the Jazz once they left and went to New York and other stops along the way. But Frank just became a good friend because that's who he is. He's just I don't know how to say it because I know it sounds being redundant or like beating a dead horse, but he was a regular guy, and he was just everybody's friend, and everybody was the same to him, and he was concerned about everybody on the same level and always asking what he could do for you. And, we just became very, very good friends. In recent years, became more meaningful to me as he got older, and our relationship became even stronger, and I'm all the better for that.
So, Smitty, for context, oftentimes when he would be on his way into the studio to do his hit with me, you would be coming straight from spending some time with Coach in his care facility. So you were good enough to give me updates that I would share with my family. We will catch a break, but Smitty's going to be along for the ride during the entire show. Coming up at 3 o'clock, it'll just be Smitty and I. But let's catch a break so we can get to Phil Johnson coming up on the other side. So here's the rundown for the show today. It's a little bit different. We are honoring the life of Frank Layden, who we lost last week at the age of 93 last Wednesday. And over the course of the next couple of weeks, you're going to hear a lot from the friends of Frank. But today we have Phil Johnson. We have his son, Scott. We have my dad, Dave Checketts, and then former Utah head coach Ron McBride stops by as well. So we'll catch our first break of a Monday show. And one of Frank's good friends, his assistant coach, Phil Johnson, will join us coming up on the other side right here on ESPN 700. We have thrown out the rundown today. We are honoring the life of Frank Layden, who we lost last week at the age of 93. Scott Layden's going to join us a little bit later. My father, Dave Checketts, Ron McBride. We may even get a random call-in from Carl Malone. We're going to see how that works. Smitty is live in studio with me all show long, which I appreciate. And let's welcome in our first guest of this Monday show, an assistant coach for Frank, won Coach of the Year in his own right, and, of course, went on with a great run next to Jerry Sloan. The great Phil Johnson, good enough to give us some time on a Monday afternoon. Phil, happy Monday, sir. How are you?
Well, nice to talk to you, Spence. How's everything going?
Everything's good. I really appreciate your time. So you're one of the first people I thought of, Phil, when we were putting this rundown together. So I just wonder how you articulate your relationship with Frank and kind of the legacy he leaves behind as he passed away last week.
Well, first of all, I was having trouble getting a job because Jerry and I had both been fired in Chicago, and so I didn't have a lot of opportunities, but Frank called, and I came out for an interview to be his assistant. And that was the start of our relationship. And it was just amazing to work for him. I had been in the Dick Motta, and my era of coaching was a lot with his style of coaching. And so Frank brought a different outlook to me of his coaching style, and so it was really important to me in my life. And he was more than just a coach to me. He was a really good friend, and I could tell him anything, and he could tell me anything, and we honored each other, and I honored him.
Coach, this is Smitty. Tell our listeners just a little bit about the inner workings when you were with Coach Layden, how he empowered those of you who are working around him in terms of working with the team every day.
Well, it's interesting because, when I first came out here, I moved out here, got the job, came out for an interview, and the press interviewed us and everything. And I was wondering when we were going to have a meeting. I kept thinking, geez, are we going to have a meeting? I'd go down to the Salt Palace, and Frank wouldn't be there. And so I just kind of waited, and finally, after I said, well, I'll go to the meeting early at Westminster for practice. And so Frank came in and just before practice and looked, and Scott and I were there, and he said, Phil, I really like what you do offensively. Can you put that in? And that was the start of our, and I said, okay. And so that day I started putting the offense in that we used here for probably 30 years. Mm-hmm. So that's how much he trusted me as to what I could do for this team. And so he was he really listened to me. He wanted to put things in that I wanted to put, and I obviously made sure he was agreed. I just didn't put things in without talking to him and so forth. But that's kind of how we worked it. And a lot of times he just turned practice over to me. He might Sam Battistone might come up to visit, and he'd say, Phil, you got practice. I'm going to talk to Sam. And so that's how much trust he had in me. But more than that, it's how I watched him coach the team, because he was a really good, tough coach. A lot of people get this idea that he was a jokester and he told jokes and he was funny. Yeah, he did that, but not with his team very much. Once in a while, but usually he was very strict. When guys rounded him to start practice, he had them have their hands behind their back, stand at attention. Now, I'd never heard of that before, but you know what? The guys did it. So that's kind of how it started, and that's how much trust he had in me.
Phil, the 1983-84 team really solidified the presence here in the market, made the playoffs, first playoff appearance since moving to Utah, won the Midwest Division. Adrian Danley, Ricky Green, All-Stars. Frank coached the All-Star team. He was Coach of the Year, Executive of the Year. He was the first to do it at the time. Only Pat Riley, Larry Bird, and one other. Frank is one of four people to have won both of those awards. But you already referenced the offense that you implemented, And the offense that year, you guys averaged like 116 points per game and one of the best offensive teams in the NBA. Tell us about that year and tell us about that experience and what it was like to watch that group come together and really the first playoff appearance, beating Denver in the first round, solidifying the Jazz here in Salt Lake.
Yeah, you got to have heart, you know.
Yeah, yep. Mm.
The Denver thing.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? The year before, we had kind of established how we were going to play. And they had drafted Mark Eaton before I even came that year. But that's the same year I came. He came in the same year I came with the team. So we added like Rich Kelly and some important pieces to that. And I'll tell you what, that team just came together. You know, Adrian Dantley, for his height, is one of the greatest players to ever play in the NBA. And so. You know, you put John Drew with him, even though he had some personal problems. He cleaned himself up for that year, and also he would come in off the bench. And so you had Ricky Green and Jerry Eves backing him up, and Daryl Griffith, and these guys that could play basketball. And so it was like Daryl Griffith. I mean, they shoot threes today, but he was shooting them then, not as often as they do today, but he could make threes. And that really made us an explosive team.
Coach, when you tell people, I don't think a lot of our fans know you were at that stint. You were with the Jazz for a couple of years, and then you got another opportunity to be a head coach with the Sacramento Kings. Tell our listeners exactly how you connected Jerry and how Coach Sloan ended up coming to take over when you left the Jazz for that opportunity.
Well, we were playing in Portland, and I got a call in the morning before the game that night, and Sam Batterson said it was Kansas City at that time. They hadn't moved yet, and he said, Kansas City wants to talk to you, and I've given them permission to talk to you. And I said, I don't want to. He said, Phil, you need to be a head coach again. And I said, okay, well, I'll talk to them. And so I interviewed with Kansas City, and they were going to move the next year to Sacramento. But anyway, I ended up taking the job, which in retrospect it was a mistake. But I took the job, and Frank said, Phil, who do you want to replace? Who do you think I should hire to replace you? And I said Jerry Sloan. Now, Jerry had done a little bit of scouting for us, not much, a little bit of scouting in the Midwest area. I said, Jerry Sloan. He said, well, Phil, would you call him for me? So I called Jerry and asked him if he wanted to replace me. So that's how that happened. He said, yeah, I'll come out and talk to Frank. And so that's how that happened. So that's an interesting story, isn't it?
Yeah, well, what's interesting about it, Coach, is that how things work that way when people are going to make a personal recommendation and just someone says, well, if Phil Johnson says that's what we should do, then that's what we should do. And it's not all this, bringing in 50 people to interview and all this kind of stuff. And that relationship that you and Frank had and the trust he had in you to rely on a recommendation like that for someone who he knew Jerry Sloan, of course, as a player and as a coach with the Chicago Bulls, but of course didn't know him, real well personally until you made that kind of a connection with him.
Yeah, and as it worked out, I ended up not lasting very long with Sacramento, and Jerry got the job, and I was his first call, and so I got released by Sacramento, and I was able to come and be Jerry's assistant. So, it was just it's in this business you gotta get lucky, which I have been in my career of being able to find some work, and then when you get that job, you got to perform. And so that's the way I've always worked as an assistant coach. I try to be as loyal as possible. I don't do anything with the team without the head coaches knowing what I'm doing. I'm not going to talk to them on the side and tell them that they're not getting enough playing time and this and that. I'm always, if I talk to them on the side, it's always backing whoever is the head coach. and I've been head assistant coach to 3 great coaches: Dick Motta, Frank Layden, and Jerry Sloan. And so that's how I've always operated as an assistant coach. But Frank was such a good basketball coach. He doesn't get enough recognition for his coaching ability. He gets more recognition for his jokester and telling stories and stuff. He was good at that, obviously, but he was a great coach.
Phil Johnson is our guest, longtime assistant coach, Utah Jazz, of course, Frank Layden, and then maybe best known around here for making sure Jerry Sloan was not ejected night after night, and good enough to give us some time on this Monday afternoon. Phil, take us behind the curtains, and you've already referenced about how you were brought back to be Jerry's assistant. And Frank would joke later on in life that if he knew coaches in the NBA were about to be paid $4, $5, $6, $7 million a year, maybe he would have reconsidered his decision. But there are very few coaches in the history of pro basketball that have decided to walk away from a team that was ready to win at a high level, the way Frank did. And of course, he wanted to, as he said, quote, enjoy life with Barbara and his kids. But take us into your understanding of how that decision came down and your reaction when you heard that even though he had put together a good team and already had some real success, he had decided to step away from a job that a lot of people would really, really want.
Well, it's interesting because I had talked to Frank, during when we saw them earlier in the year before he retired, and he says, "Don't make any moves. Something's going to happen here." That's what he told me. So I was not surprised. He said, "Don't you go anyplace or anything until you find out what's going on here." And so that's really how he operated with me. And I knew that, and I'm an example, myself and Jerry Sloan, of when it's time and you feel it in your soul that it's time to get out and leave, that's what you do. And that's what Jerry and I did. That's what Frank did. And so that's kind of what happens with that. You just you feel like, and it's in really good hands with Jerry Sloan. That's how he felt. And so I haven't spent a lot of time talking to him about it, but I think that was kind of his thought process.
Yeah, I think that Coach, the relationship that you guys built with the players and the way that you coached them, you could always see, the respect they had for how you approached the job every day in practice and what that meant to you in terms of getting ready for the games. Can you talk to us just a little bit about, that daily practice regimen and the kind of approach that you and Coach Layden had with the players?
Well, it just was. There was no joking around. It was always serious business when we started practice, and we had a routine. For instance, when I came with Frank, I worked with the big guy. We would split up, half on each end, and Scott and Frank would work with the small of the guards on one end, and I'd work with the forwards and the centers on the other end and we had drills and something. So we got into a routine, and that's been the story of my life. That's how I live my life now, is routine. And if you can get into a routine and let them know what's going to happen, and you'll change things, obviously, along the way, but get into a routine and know that you're going to work on the things that's going to benefit them later. And that's really how you build their confidence and their ability to accept what you're doing, and so they don't have to do a bunch of radical changes every time. Now, once you start the season, you're going to have to change for each opponent and that type of thing, and you've got to be ready for that. But that's kind of how we approached it, and so that's just how we ran things.
Yeah, it's interesting, Coach, that you mentioned about how good a coach that Frank was in the X's and O's and how serious he was during practice sessions and during the course of games and making adjustments and timeouts and so forth. I recently saw a documentary done by the granddaughter of Yogi Berra, who put a documentary together about his career and his life, basically making the point that he was one of the best catchers of all time in baseball, and all the numbers, not just because he was on championship Yankee teams, but all of his individual numbers showed that he was one of the best catchers ever. and yet he never gets quite that due for being an actual day-to-day baseball player because of all the quips and the quotes and the stories he would tell afterward. Everybody kind of gleaned on that and kind of didn't really pay attention to the hardcore stuff he was doing every day as a ball player. And that kind of alludes a little bit to what you were saying earlier about how Frank, he got more attention for the stories and the interviews and all that than really about how good of a coach he was on the floor.
Yeah, I think that's very relatable. And Frank, for instance, he had so much trust in me like I said, routine and everything, but he had so much trust in me that he would come and, he'd call a timeout, and they'd come and he'd stand up and I would kneel down in the huddle, and he would talk. He seldom got on his knees or anything. The way he would stand up and talk to him, and he'd talk to him about this and that, or what's going on the score, this and that. Then he'd lean over to me and he says, "Phil, what do you want to run?" That's how much trust he had, and that's how we ran things. And then Scott had his input too. Scott was great with his input as far as he had knowledge way beyond his years. And so, it was just an effective staff, and you can't overlook guys like Sparky, that was our trainer, that had tremendous loyalty to the coaches, and it went down the line. The ownership, Sam Battistone, was great to work for during that time. So things went well.
And Phil Johnson is with us here on The Drive. We are honoring the life and legacy of Frank Layden, who passed last week at the age of 93. And I want to hear from both of you on this, because I've heard both of you say this and other people as well, because of Frank's front-facing kind of comedic personality. He did dazzling dunks and basketball bloopers with Marv Albert that I've watched 10,000 times as a kid. The coaching phase of his life is often overlooked. But what about the talent evaluation? And it's never a decision made by one person, and Frank had Scott and scouts, but you can make an argument that John and Carl are two of the best draft picks of all time. And then there's Mark Eaton. Then there's Thurl Bailey. Then there's Bobby Hansen and trading for Adrian Dantley. Later, Jeff Hornacek is brought in. So, Phil, we'll start with you. Then, Smitty, I want to hear from you as well. So, Frank certainly, as a basketball coach, had high acumen, but it's pretty undeniable that he also was an excellent evaluator of talent, yeah?
Well, I don't think there's any question. First of all, Scott was really good at that, and always has been. And we're in a position where Frank really listened to people. He listened to Scott, and he listened to people around him. And then what goes with that is you got to get a little lucky. You know what? You don't. We made some choices that weren't particularly good, but you've got to get a little bit lucky even for that guy to be available. And then once you get him, that he's as good as you think he's going to be. We go back. Yeah, I can take you back to when John Stockton came out. We'd heard he was a pretty good basketball player, and we went back to Chicago to the tryout camps back there, and I saw him play, and I said, and Scott and I were sitting together, and I said, Scott, this guy's pretty darn good. So we kept watching film and everything, and we kept thinking that Portland was going to take him ahead of us. And so when we called the press in to see who we had on our board as prospective draft picks, we didn't put John Stockton's name on the board. That's how we were hiding him from the press and not even using his name. And so when we saw that and Portland didn't take him, we were right there and were able to get him. So you have to juggle in there, and then you've got to get lucky that John Stockton's going to be as hard a worker and great a person as he is. And so that's what we tried to look for, is character. Guys that had character and were good people, and then along with their talent. So really that's kind of how it went.
Yeah, it is interesting, Coach. The base of the foundation of the Jazz organization as it exists today, some 50 years later, was all set by the tone, I think, of Frank as the general manager, and then as he was the head coach, and the kind of players he tried to bring in. I mean, it was just right off the bat, 1980, drafting Darrell Griffith, 81, trading for Adrian Dantley, 82 drafting Dominic Wilkins, who never came, could have been one of the guys with the group, that took off in the 80s, but had that thing. But at that time, we remember that the Jazz were in trouble financially, and so some of the money that they paid to sell Dominic Wilkins' rights to Atlanta helped to keep the team afloat at that time, and something like that enters into the fray, and Frank just went, just did what he had to do at that moment in time to make sure, it worked as best as you could. And then he drafts, Mark Eaton and Bobby Hansen, and then John Stockton, and then Karl Malone, and that basis, but getting the right guys. And I remember being there. Those are the first two drafts that I was helping out with, was in 84, 85, and getting John at 16. And then the next year, Karl was supposed to go 5, 6, 7, and he kept falling. I remember Frank saying to Scott, "What are we going to do at 13?" Well, we got to take Malone if he's there. And Frank goes, "Well, I hope there's nothing wrong with him. I mean, how come everybody else is passing him?" And Scott goes, "Well, we got to take him. He's the best player." And that's it turned out to be that he came to us at 13, and we take him. And I remember Frank in the post-draft media availability session said, well, somebody asked him, are you hoping Malone will score a lot of points for you next year? And he said, well, we got a lot of scoring. We have Adrian Dantley, and we have Darryl Griffith, and we have Ricky Green, and we have John Drew coming off the bench. And he goes, and we got Mark Eaton developing as a rim protector in the middle, but we really need some rebounding, so we hope he comes in and helps us with the rebounding and interior defense. And then if he scores 8 or 10 points a game, that'll be a bonus, and 35,000 points later or whatever, but like you say, you got to get the right guys, you got to get a foundation, but then also there's some measure of luck that where you get guys like John and Karl, who not only end up being great people, hard workers, great talent, but also they just happen to play every night, every game, for all these years. They're not taking nights off, and they're not doing load management or whatever. They're just playing every single night, and that was a big thing that you just kind of luck into.
Yeah, that's part of it. That's for sure, and that is the part that comes along with the luck, But you also got to you've got to do your work and also plan for anything you can.
Phil, last thing, and we'll set you loose, sir. So much appreciate you joining us today. Of course, I think it's safe to say the majority of our listeners of a certain age remember you and Jerry on the sidelines during the incredible run you had together that led to a couple of NBA Finals appearances and the golden era of Jazz basketball. How much of that era, I do not want to take any of it away from you and Jerry, but since we're talking about Frank, how much of that era had Frank's fingerprints on it?
Well, he had them all. It was all over with him because he had set the franchise. He had saved the franchise. Bottom line, and we had a basis to work from, and then we just carried it on, and Jerry coached in his own style. He didn't coach exactly like Frank, or he didn't coach exactly like any coach he had played for. He coached like Jerry Sloan coaches, and I helped him like I help coaches, and I helped him, and we had a great relationship, and that's really the basis for how we succeeded. We also were lucky to have really good players, and then we're able to play games and play a lot of games and not miss games. I mean, players today, it's amazing how they take games off and miss games, and our players didn't do that. And so not only that, later on we had the tremendous backing of our players with ownership as far as Larry Miller was concerned. You had Mark Eaton that backed us tremendously, and we had John Stockton and Karl Malone that simply wouldn't have allowed. Now, Larry was loyal to us and everything, but if things got tough, your players have to back you. And that's what we had. And we had Frank behind us as well. So that's how things worked out, and that's how the longevity happened.
Phil, thank you, sir, for the time. Really appreciate the context. Hope everything is well with you. And if you ever want to hop on the show, I've got a space for you. Hope you know that.
All right. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Thanks, Coach.
Phil Johnson, longtime head coach in college and in the NBA, and then was Frank's assistant for a few years and came back to stand alongside Jerry Sloan for an incredible run of Jazz basketball that nearly culminated in maybe one, if not two championships, if it's not for a guy named Michael Jordan. We'll catch a break. Coming up next, Smitty live in studio. It's just the two of us for a segment. We're going to bring in Scott Layden a little bit later. Dave Checketts, Ron McBride. A lot to do on a busy Monday drive, honoring the life and legacy of the great Frank Layden. So don't go anywhere. Keep it right here on ESPN 700. All right, I got 1 hour down. We have 3 hours to go on this scorching hot Monday afternoon in July. It's great to have you along for the ride. We have thrown out the rundown today, and we are honoring the life and legacy of the great Frank Layden, who we lost last week at the age of 93. Richard Smith is good enough to join me live in studio, and really nobody better to be by my side today as we welcome in these great guests. We just spent about 30 minutes with Phil Johnson. It was awesome. Scott and Layden will join us coming up in about 26 or 7 minutes from right now. We'll bring in Dave Checketts. Ron McBride will join us live in Hawaii, the former Utah football coach who became very close with Frank. But, Smitty, just you and I this segment, and I wanted to take advantage of this space to talk about your relationship with Frank following his retirement. We will talk a lot about the man, the coach, the talent evaluator, as we have with Phil. But you traveled with Frank and Barbara. You spent countless hours with the Layden family on trips, and you would go see him on a regular basis. You have a unique prism and perspective on Frank Layden, the man, not just Frank Layden, the coach, or the talent evaluator. So what sort of insight can you give us based on all the time that you spent with Frank, Barbara, and the entire family?
Yeah, we were very fortunate. Linda and I spent a lot of time with them, even going back into the 90s, where we would go on these trips. And Linda was asking me this the other day, and I really couldn't remember the logistics of how we did it. But we always had a trip of 3 or 4 days down in early July every summer down to the Utah Shakespeare Festival in Cedar City on the campus of Southern Utah University. And it was Linda and I, Scott and Marcia and their young family, Frank and Barbara would come, and Jerry and Rose Weber, who were good friends of ours, would come with their young family. And we would go down there every year, most of the 90s, every early July. And Linda was saying, well, how'd you guys do it when if you had summer league or you had the free agent period, which always is early July, and you had the draft, right near the end of June or whatever. And I said, I don't remember how we did it, but we did it because we were all there for a number of years in a row together. And this was before the advent of cell phones, and really before the proliferation of email, and certainly texting didn't exist at that time. So I'm not sure how we did. Maybe when Scott comes on, he may recall, how we did it because he was the front man on a lot of that kind of stuff that would be going on in the summer during that time. But we just became close friends. I think it was maybe partly because of our East Coast roots. I grew up in Connecticut. Frank was a Brooklyn guy. Scott, of course, grew up in New York and a lot of time up in the Buffalo area when he was a teenager. And part of it is because of our love for the theater, and that's what took us to the Shakespeare Festival every summer. Partly our love of baseball. We would go to a lot of the minor league baseball games here at that point in time, and then as Frank retired, he would have more time to do that, and we would find time. Linda and I just became good friends with Frank and Barbara. We had a lot of mutual interests, and we just enjoyed each other's company to that extent. And then in 2011, we started this annual summer baseball trip that was growing out of us going to Bees games with our friends Chris Lino and Colleen Lindstrom, and we would sit there and everybody would talk about, someday we should go to a major league game. Someday we should go to a major league game. And so one time I just said, hey, I'm tired of hearing about the major league game. Either let's just go to a major league game or stop talking about it. And everybody goes, oh, well, we could go to a major league. I said, well, when? When are we going to do it? And so right then Frank goes, Smitty's right. Let's what do we got? Let's get a date. Let's go. And so we hammered something out for that summer. We ended up going to Colorado Rockies, and that started a 15-year trek that still exists today. The last couple of years, Frank and Barbara haven't been able to travel, but they've always been in on the discussion of, okay, where are, quote, we going this year? And it was always to a ballpark that somebody hadn't been to before. So it started in Colorado, and then it went to San Francisco, then it went to Arizona, then it went to Anaheim, then it went to San Diego, then it went to L.A., then it went to Minnesota and so forth, and we just had a great time planning those events and spending time with each other in that regard, and a lot of dinners and a lot of hanging out at local restaurants and local theater up at Pioneer Theater, a lot, and going to plays or musicals downtown here, and just kind of how friendships evolve. Spence, you find common ground and you like each other's company, and you enjoy and are comfortable with each other, and it just evolves and it just grows naturally, and we were the beneficiaries of that friendship and that kind of closeness over the years that again, we're talking about building teams and drafting players and everything. Some of it you can plan and some of it you can control, and then there's a certain part of it that's out of your control that just happens. And our friendship started with certain roots, but then it just grew into something else that just took place and evolved over the years, and very powerful for Linda and I to have those kind of friendships with the Layden family.
Excuse me. I'll have to go back. Excuse me. I'll have to go back and try to find this sound. But I think it was about 2 years ago, and maybe Porter can help me out here. And we had Frank on a lot, so it wasn't like, a 1 or 2 time thing. But his favorite Frank Sinatra song was, I think it's called My Way. I think that's the name of the song. And so to intro Frank, I played it coming in, and I noticed in the background that he was singing. Yeah. And so I just laid back. As the host, I just backed away from the mic, and we let that breathe for like a minute, and he just sang the entire intro, and it was just like the sweetest thing. I wonder, you already referenced some of the things that he was interested in outside of basketball. Can you elaborate on that, whether it's theater or food or music? Like, Jazz fans know Frank Layden as the coach and then the front-facing funny guy, but the man, what was he interested in outside of sports?
Well, I'll tell you what, you talk about, joining in the song. We would go out for an evening and, have a dinner somewhere. And it was nothing. It wasn't like we were, going to these 5-star restaurants and 3 Michelin star places or whatever. Frank and Barbara were very mom and pop-ish, and they just like to support the local, small places. The Other Place, Greek restaurant, where we had the family celebration the other day after the funeral mass service, and we would go there frequently for a bite to eat. And then Frank would always say, hey, how about some dessert? How about if we go get an ice cream at Dairy Queen? Okay, Coach. And anytime we would drive by a Dairy Queen, wherever it was, and Linda has a great story about the 3 of them, I wasn't there at the time, being down at the Shakespeare Festival and spending an hour one night driving around Cedar City looking for a Dairy Queen, because Frank said, no, that's what we have to get a Dairy Queen ice cream. So anytime we would go by one, wherever we were, and we'd be out of town somewhere traveling, we'd be down in Anaheim, we'd be in Phoenix or whatever, and we'd drive by and Frank would go, hey, there's a Dairy Queen. How come there aren't more Dairy Queens? Like, I don't understand why they're not on every corner like McDonald's. They're like the best thing ever. So we would go up. There was one that closed recently up in Centerville and had been there for a long time. Alex Jensen and knows it well, growing up in Centerville. And we would go get a Dairy Queen ice cream and would sit in the parking lot. And there's me and Frank in the front seats and Linda and Barbara in the back seats. We're eating it, and I'd turn on Frank Sinatra. And whatever it was, I'd just put it on, had it on my phone, hit one of the songs, boom. Frank and Barbara just go right into song.
Oh, that's great.
Boom, boom, oh yeah, but and they're just singing away, and Linda and I, and we're looking at each other, and so Linda would join in, and then she'd be looking at me like, well, come on. I go, these guys are like they're like killing me, and they're singing, and they're dancing their shoulders, and what we all affectionately called seat dancing, and there'd be seat dancing and whatever. And this is when they're in their late 80s. We're still doing this, and they're singing and they're enjoying Dairy Queen ice cream cones, sitting in the car in the parking lot. This is like, this would be like some story of somebody telling, George Bush, used to like to hang out at the Taco Bell or something, But this is a real thing, and this is how they were. It was just the simplest things and the things that made them happy and that were personal and that were easy, and that's just kind of the friendship we had, and that evolved, and it was simple, and we just knew that there wasn't any pretension to any of the stuff that we were doing together.
A man who was on a list with Pat Riley, Red Auerbach, and Larry Bird is just smashing Dairy Queen ice cream. Was it vanilla? What was his order?
Well, see, for example, Frank would always get. He would always get. Well, Smitty, what are you getting? I get a medium vanilla cone with the chocolate dip. Yeah, I get that. I'll get that. And Barbara always has to have chocolate. Chocolate ice cream is her favorite ice cream in the world. So we all knew Barbara's getting a chocolate, Linda's getting a vanilla, a chocolate twist. Frank and Smitty are getting the chocolate dip. Okay, whatever. And that was our regular order going through the Dairy Queen drive-through. The other thing, Linda just texted me, so I got him, and this is a good reminder. You talk about Frank. Frank was such an avid reader, and Scott mentioned this a little bit in his comments at the service the other day. But Frank was always about gaining more knowledge, gaining information about whatever. He was an avid reader, and he and Linda, my wife, would always bond over the Sunday New York Times book section. So Frank would always get the New York Times. He'd read the book section, and then whenever Linda and I happened to come over the next time to visit, and he would say the first thing, we'd walk in the room, and Barbara and Frank would be sitting there, and we'd go, "Hey, what's going on?" I go, Linda, right here. I got the book report right here, and he'd hold it up like that was the first thing. Don't forget. I got the book section right here for you. And Linda would take it and go over and sit next to Barbara, and she'd open up and read. Oh yeah, I already read this book. I read that book, and they'd be going back and forth about books they read that were in common and whatnot. And he was always even up to his last months. He was a voracious reader and accumulator of information. He wanted to know what was going on, what's happening in the world, what's new, what should I be aware of. I would walk in the room, Smitty, what's new? Give me some updates. Well, this and that, whatever. And that his mind, even toward the end, Spence was still in full speed and was still curious about the world around him.
So upon his passing, Smitty, Frank and Barbara married 68 years.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about that relationship. In preparation for the show today, I found a documentary that was done on that 83-84 team. I think our friends at KSL put that together. And Frank that year had the honor of coaching the All-Star team. And he was asked by a media member, is this the highlight of your life? Is this the most fun task that you've ever had? And he said, no, my honeymoon was the highlight of my life. And, there was a humor intertwined into the tapestry of the response. But ultimately, you could see the light in his eyes. And 68 years, it's a long time. Children, grandchildren. Tell me about your experience with Frank and Barbara.
Well, that's going to choke me up a little bit because Frank was such a public figure. And wherever we went, and somebody mentioned this the other day, hey, whenever you're out to dinner with Frank, and Frank says, hey, I got to use the restroom, it's going to be at least a 20-minute process because it takes him 10 minutes to get to the restroom because he stops at every table along the way with someone going, hey, Coach, how you doing? Hey, what are you guys doing? What is that? You got the lobster tonight? What is that? Whatever. And the same thing coming back. And Barbara was used to that when they would be together, walking together. And yet, Frank, whenever someone might come up and say, "Oh, Coach, how you doing? Hey, can I introduce you to my cousin? He really wants to say hello." Yeah, of course, whatever. You'd introduce him, and Frank would always immediately turn and say, "And let me introduce you to my wife, Barbara." He would always include Barbara in anything that was going on, however small it was. or whatever fancy affair he was getting an award at or something, he would always mention Barbara as the backbone of what he was doing, and that she was so important to him and his life. And I'll tell you, Spence, even in the last few months, and he was fighting, in the hospital, and every time I would go there, one of the first things he would say to me was, where's Barbara? Is Barbara coming up today? And she would come up virtually every day to visit with him, and she was still living at home and had some people helping her out there, but he was always wondering where Barbara was, or if Barbara was doing okay. And this was the life they had. He was always looking out for her and understanding that not only was she just as much a part of who he was as a public figure, but also that she should not be left in the background in that regard, that she had earned and deserved to be recognized just like he was in any kind of public setting. And Barbara was so great at it and was so accommodating to Frank and understood what was going on and just had such a cheerful disposition. The both of them just together, they just lit up the room no matter what the circumstance was. It was such a heart-rendering feeling and such a, I should say, heartwarming experience to see them together and to try and learn for yourself that this is how I need to be. This is how I should be living my life with the people that are important to me, is the way that they are every single day. And it's, that was one of the powerful parts of his personality that he had.
Also, 3 children. Of course, most people know Scott because he's had his own very successful career in basketball, Mike and Kate, and I believe 11 grandchildren.
Yeah.
10 girls, 1 boy.
Yeah, that's right. That's
So
right.
give us some insight on Frank Layden, the father and the grandfather.
Well, he's a very doting grandfather. One of he loves all the obviously the grandchildren. He's always the Scott's family with four daughters are all really into reading and education, and they're always exchanging with Frank conversations, phone calls, notes about books, about swapping books with each other, because he was such a voracious reader. Katie's daughters were all avidly involved in athletics growing up. Their youngest granddaughter, Riley, is a softball player up in the state of Washington and at the collegiate level, and Frank was always going to her games as much as he could here locally, and then always asking about how she's doing up there. Does she have a game this weekend? What's going on? How's she hitting the ball? How's she swinging? All that kind of stuff. Is just just very involved in the whole process of the grandchildren and how they were doing in their respective areas. And again, they all have different, like all of us, different interests and different things that they are involved in. But he always made sure that he was actively involved in what they were doing and showing interest in what they were involved in. And, again, that's just who he was. It wasn't a fake thing. It wasn't something, I have this obligation as a grandfather. I'm supposed to do this and make a phone call about this or whatever. He did it out of love and out of true heartfelt feeling for the family that he had around him. And, it's just one of his great personality traits.
Not to go James Earl Jones' Field of Dreams on you, but you referenced Frank's granddaughter playing softball. And Frank loved baseball, right? Well, some of my favorite stories that Frank would share, because it's one of the first things I thought of when I first got this job is like, I'm bringing Frank on to do all the Frank things and tell all the Frank stories because it's great radio. And oftentimes I wouldn't even ask a question, but sometimes his soliloquies would kind of transition over into his stories of going to Ebbets Field, growing up watching the Brooklyn Dodgers when he was a child back in Brooklyn. I believe he played, right? Tell me about his love of baseball a little bit, as you're handing me a picture of a baseball signed by the great Jackie Robinson. A life is not important except in the fact, a life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives. Frank oftentimes has used that line.
That was his favorite Jackie Robinson quote. That's what he always used to use somewhere in any major speech he gave, in any kind of award ceremony, or somebody asked him to come speak at some gathering, whatever it might be. He would always somewhere in his talk mention that quote from Jackie Robinson, and say that's what we all have to be about. We all have to be about, figuring out how we can impact other people's lives. What is going to be important for someone else. And that baseball picture I just showed you is a baseball that we got from the last major league game that we were at, and we put that inscription on it from Jackie Robinson, and Scott placed it on the casket at the burial site for Frank in honor of his love of baseball and his admiration for Jackie Robinson and what he meant to American culture, but also to human relations. And what Frank tried to live by himself every day was the aspect of how can I positively impact someone else's life. And whatever that's going to be today, that's what I'm going to try to do. And I just got to tell you this quick story. Spence, Frank was in the hospital. This is 3 weeks ago. We're going down to L.A. to see a Dodger weekend series. And Frank knew about it, and he had good friends down with the Dodgers. And he was trying to tell me that, he wanted me to get something from the Dodgers for one of the caretakers that was helping him, Omar and Lauren. They're great caregivers for the Layden family. And he's telling me, Omar is a big Dodger fan. Can you bring something back from the Dodgers for him? So I do that. I bring it back. It's in his hospital room. I go in. They're there visiting with them. They said, hey, where'd you get the Dodger stuff for Frank? We go, no, this isn't for Frank. This is for you. And Omar says, for me? I said, no, here. And I give him this stuff, a bunch of things. And he goes, this is unbelievable. He goes, oh, my dad is going to be, this is great. I said, no, this is Frank. I said, I'm just the courier. Frank instructed me when I'm in L.A. the other day to go get this stuff for you and bring it back for you because he knew it was important to you. And it brought tears to our eyes and everything. And Frank's laying in his bed and giving a thumbs up because he couldn't quite talk, clearly enough at that time. But even in that moment of his life, he's thinking about what can I do for somebody else that will brighten their day and make their day better. And, it's just such a great example for me and for everyone to be able to look at.
Let me clean up the quote. Quote, a life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives, attributed to the great Jackie Robinson. We'll catch a break. Scott Layden is going to join us coming up next. I want to tell you about my friends at Utah Elite Services. Right now with summer here, it's the perfect time to be introducing our newest partner of the ESPN Sports Network. Utah Elite Services, a Utah-grown asphalt maintenance and concrete repair company. We've seen rain, snow, and wind, and now we have the heat. Your concrete has been through a lot. If you see any cracks or extreme damage that need to be fixed, give Utah Elite Services a call. Corey's team can take care of crack sealing, coating, stripping, asphalt overlays, complete tear-outs, and replacement of your concrete. Don't let the concrete outside of your home, condo, or even business be a sore thumb. Get it fixed with Utah Elite Services. Give Utah Elite Services a call for a no-cost, no-obligation estimate at 801-821-8670. That's 801-821-8670. Doing something a little bit different on the show today, honoring the life and legacy of the legendary Frank Layden, who we lost last week at the age of 93. And his son, Scott, will join us with Richard Smith live in studio coming up on the other side of a quick break on a Monday Drive on ESPN 700. start out the rundown today.
Jupiter
to
and
honor the
Mars.
life and legacy of the great Frank Layden,
In other
who we
words-
lost last week at the age of 93. Joined by Phil Johnson to start the show. Going to bring in Dave Checketts, my father. Ron McBride will join us in the 5 o'clock hour live in Hawaii. Richard Smith is live in studio. And we go live to Las Vegas, where Frank's son, Scott Layden, good enough to give us some time on a Monday afternoon. Scotty, happy Monday, sir. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. What a lineup! It's an honor. No, it is.
Well,
Thank you.
It's awesome to have you, Scott. And I'm going to start with a simple question. What was it like being Frank's son?
Well, as you could imagine, it was amazing because so many lessons. Both he and my mom were incredible parents, and we were all blessed with them, and also he shared himself to so many people, and especially in the Utah community. But he from early on, it was just a lot of fun being a gym rat in his world. So, and he had a lot of great friends. A lot of his friends were characters, and so that was one thing I always enjoyed, is the opportunity to be around him. And he was competitive. He was smart. He was a teacher, very honest and kind, and always did the right thing. So many lessons to be learned from him. And again, I just think our family was blessed to have our parents and how they were around us.
Spence, this is you got Scott Layden on the air. You got him on live. So this is kind of like the Dallas Mavericks in the recent draft lottery.
I am
having
Nico
a
Harrison.
1.8% chance,
If that,
of getting the top pick, and the balls fall your way, and you have Scott Layden on the air. This is like over the lottery odds. This is amazing, Scott. Before
you ask the question,
this is going to devolve. I can tell. Really,
is your role today to break my chops? Come on.
Apparently that's the position I find myself in. So we get. Hey, I know better than anybody. This is a one-shot deal. So we got to get them all in on the one shot that we have.
Hey, hardly. You know what? Hardly. And you know what? Spence had sent me a beautiful note last week, and I said, of course. And then, as if I wasn't going to go on after his dad strong-armed me to come on. So there you go.
I thought you were going to say, I'm doing it with Smitty. I go, well, no, I don't have time for that. Hey, tell us a little bit. Before we get into it with your dad, just what's happening in Vegas? Give us the vibe at the Summer League.
I just got here. I was just here for a couple meetings and visit some friends, and then as you know, I told you, Smitty, I'm going to keep heading west so we can visit some more friends. So because of the events this past weekend, I've had a lot of melancholy thoughts, but it's certainly rich to see a lot of people here, and I can't tell you the outpouring of the NBA community, but also and your phone was going crazy too, Smitty, because you're such a dear friend of my parents. But it was like, the jazz community, they were amazing, with the shirts and the signage, and the Utah outpouring was fantastic. So this is an opportunity to visit and be around some great folks from the NBA.
Yeah, how about the Saturday service, which was amazing? You did such an amazing job there at that, and yet the people who showed up with such a short turnaround, so to speak, who came from out of town to support you and your family at the services. It was just an amazing tribute to your dad and what he meant to all of them.
Yeah, no, I think that we purposely had a quick turnaround, and the Cathedral of Madeline was so accommodating. I thought they did an amazing job with the mass and the music and everything. I know my mom really enjoyed that, but all the people that came out, and I know the Jazz made an incredible effort to have all their people there, whether it was Ryan Smith or Danny and Austin and Jay-Z, and I'm very good friends with Coach Hardy, so it was certainly amazing. And then other NBA folks came by that were I didn't anticipate any of that, and there was a strong Spurs alumni because of my time there. So, RC and Dave Tellep and Dennis Lindsay of Spurs and Jazz fame. Of course, Sam Presti made an incredible effort. He probably won the award furthest away, right? So,
yeah.
But I don't know. All these folks really appreciated my dad, and I think it makes the family feel special. It makes my mom feel special. So that part of it was an amazing that you don't anticipate that. And then, of course, we had the who's who of pallbearers, John Stockton, Karl Malone, Richard Smith, Rich Kelly, and Thurl Bailey. That was the starting lineup.
Dave
and then
Checketts.
Off the bench was Dave Checketts. And, it was really that to see those guys in the front, all you guys in the front row was, I don't know, it was surreal. And how my dad felt about all those guys. And obviously Mark was missed, but when you put all those guys together, I think the common thread is that they all had tremendous character, and I think that's why my dad enjoyed being around those guys and coaching those guys, because of their commitment to playing hard and playing the right way. My dad he only had a couple rules, and he would, at the start of the season, he would say, "Look, this is very simple. I have two rules: be on time and play hard." And it sounds, with where we are today with analytics and everything we have going on in the game, but his teams were they presented and then they played hard. So and then it carried on to obviously Coach Sloan, which was play hard, play smart, and stay together. So it's very the simplicity of it was incredible, but we had guys of tremendous character, and then we had tough guys. I go down the roster, and I want you to tell me, and I'm going to miss some guys, Smitty, but in Larry Miller, okay, Dave Checketts, Frank Layden, Jerry Sloan, Phil Johnson, John Stockton, Karl Malone, Thurl Bailey, Mark Eaton, and I can keep going, but if you just take that crew right there, they had a mental toughness about them that was it was amazing. And I obviously I'm showing up at work every day. I'm looking around. I'm thinking, wow, this is impressive. And they always exceeded expectations. They always exceeded and got better all the time because of the work ethic and the mental part of it. And all those guys. I mean, go right down the list. Your dad Spence is as tough-minded a guy as I know. Larry Miller, look, we don't need to go any further than Third West to see his accomplishments. So it was fun to be part of that. And I think in these moments, you have so many, thoughts racing through your mind. And so I feel blessed for that.
Well, the emotional part I had, Scott, of many at the service on Saturday was standing in the line with the pallbearers getting ready for the beginning of the mass, and there right at the front of the line is John Stockton and Karl Malone, who both live out of town and are both notified on, I assume, sometime during the day, Thursday, maybe late Thursday, that we're going to have the service on Saturday morning. And there they are at the front of the line.
Yeah.
And, just showing what your dad meant to them, not just as players and employees and the team and all that, but just as people, and what influence he had on their lives in that regard, that they made whatever the arrangements were they had to make to be there to honor your dad in that regard.
Yeah, I think they love playing for my dad. He loved coaching them, and it's their effort to come. It really tickled my mom that they were able to be there, and as both John and Karl, and Karl especially said, no, I wouldn't miss this for the world. So those things are all, like, I think you remember that forever, and I think going back to how my dad felt about all those guys, he always appreciated trying to get players of character. I mean, I can't tell you how often he would talk about Thurl Bailey and just, his character as a person, and how unflappable he was, and how, he was such a team guy. So those guys are just, I mean, they were a blessing when my dad was coaching, but they're a blessing and a treasure to Utah now.
Hey, Scott, let's settle the urban myth that's been going on for years here. Explain to our listeners exactly how it came to be that Scott Layden was hired to be an assistant coach for the Utah Jazz.
I don't know if it's a myth, but I have always been a supporter, and I appreciate nepotism. So I think otherwise how am I getting a job here? But the thing, and reflecting a lot now, the thing that was so incredible was working together with my dad in a competitive environment. And, the staff was very small, and, the other guys, obviously, whether it was Coach Johnson and then Coach Sloan, it was an incredible time of being in an intense environment, a very competitive environment, but then just, always being together. I don't know, most kids, when they graduate from college, they're running away from their parents. I ran towards them, and I was fortunate that my dad would hire me, and then we had this incredible relationship, and it worked very well. But he had, as you guys know well, he had great street sense, and he had great basketball sense, and he knew what it took to team build. He was ahead of his time. And when you look at when he took over the Jazz, and one of his big things was, always leave a place better than the way you found it. So when the team moved to Salt Lake City in '79, I mean, he really ramped up the talent on the team and identified, players that could help us win. And it was before, and long before, we got into the Stockton to Malone era, and Mark Eaton changed the franchise. You go back to that time, but signing Ricky Green, signing Jeff Wilkins, drafting Mark Eaton, right there. But then obviously drafting Darrell Griffith. Though all of a sudden the pieces were coming together. Adrian Dantley, John Drew, on, and we were a competitive team, but we were anchored by a guy that didn't get enough credit, but certainly talk about character and toughness. Mark Eaton was the I-beam that kept us all going, and it was a fun time, but competitive, and it wasn't always like fun and games, but it was just in a world where we were fighting to win. And then of course my dad turned the team over to my dad and obviously Dave Checketts, but they turned the team over to Jerry Sloan, and Coach Sloan took everything to the next level, which was impressive. Yeah.
Chatting with Scott Layden, excuse me, on the show today. We have thrown out the rundown to do something special. We are honoring the life and legacy of his father, community pillar Frank Layden, who passed last week at the age of 93. Scotty, I believe upon your father's passing, your parents had been married 68 years. I wonder, yes. I wonder if you could, to the extent that you feel comfortable, shed some insight on experiencing that relationship, watching those two for your entire life.
Yeah, it was. They got along famously, and they were always together, which was a wonderful thing about them. And 68 years, as you know, it's a pretty good number right now. But it never. It always amazed me at how well they got along, how well they were. Both in public and in private, and how great of parents they were. But my mom always, set my dad up as the straight person to make him shine. But it was an interesting quality. I know you guys have seen this, and because he was such a public figure and in the public often, he would always point out my mother. And he would always talk about her in a public setting, and he would just heap praise on her. And I always remember that. I just said, he always had this opportunity, but he always took advantage of the opportunity to just tell everyone how amazing she was, because she, my mom has an incredible resume herself as far as her education and helping people, who are less fortunate, and people that have had some addiction issues. So she's always been behind the scenes, but had this amazing career. And my dad always appreciated that, always recognized that. And they were always, the couple. I talked about this a little bit at the mass, but they were like always curious. So they were always reading. They were always into, whether it was sports, watching TV, every sport. It wasn't just basketball, going to the theater, and then performing in the theater. They performed a famous play that couples perform, Love Letters. And I just thought that was an amazing thing that they did, because it showed their depth and their intelligence and everything. And when you're listening to Smitty knows this play well, but when you're watching Love Letters, and it's usually performed by famous couples, but and they probably did 30 or so performances, but the fiction of it was blurred with the reality of their lives, and it was in the last scene of the play. There's a great quote. He's don't ever think I've loved anyone the way I loved her, and I know I never will again. She was at the heart of my life, and I already miss her desperately. I just wanted to say that to you and to her. So it was like it was really an amazing relationship and a loving relationship. And then, you know, I don't know if you guys knew this, but when my parents, where they first met is they met at Mrs. McGuire's bar, which is in Rockaway, Long Island, New York. And Mrs. McGuire was the mother of 2 Hall of Famers. She had 3 boys, but 2 of them were Hall of Famers. One was Al McGuire, who, you know, is interesting how it, you know, weaves through Coach Majerus and the whole Brooklyn thing. But Al McGuire was not only a great basketball coach, won the championship at Marquette, but he also was a good player. But his brother, Dick McGuire, is in the Hall of Fame for, like, he was just an incredible NBA player, one of the first, like, real point guards, you know, whether it was McGuire, Cousy, and then, you know, everybody compared John to those guys because they would pass first and they were unselfish and everything. Anyway, they used to have basketball courts across the street from Mrs. McGuire's bar. And it was like 108th Street in the Rockaways, which is on the beach. And, you know, it's a short throw. The Rockaways is we're all firemen and cops and everything. But across the street from her bar were these basketball courts, and guys would go out and play pickup games. And my dad, you know, like everybody else who was playing ball then, he had just graduated from college. He was going in the Army. He was playing ball, and he went and had a I don't know what you're allowed to say on this radio. Maybe it's like a diet soda or something. But
yeah, here we go.
Yeah. So he went to the bar and met my mom, and that was it. And then they were inseparable. So it was a time, you know. And then of course, my dad went in the Army, and they moved out to Long Island, and my dad started his coaching and career and teaching in high school, you know, starting out at St. Agnes, where Billy Donovan's father played for my dad. And then eventually we drafted Billy Donovan. And so there's so many, you know, basketball connections. And one of my dad's good friends was Lou Conaseca, who coached St. John's, and you know, there's a great connection there. And as I was saying earlier, there's always characters around that he knew, his friends, and they'd always be. You'd always see them, and you'd always go to their camps, and then he would take their children into his camp, and it was really a fun time.
You know, Spence, what Scott hasn't mentioned is during the time Frank and Barbara were dating, Scott's mom was a central figure working at the famous 21 Club in Midtown Manhattan. Mm-hmm. And Frank used to love to tell the story about going to pick up Barbara and guys out in front going, "Hey, I don't know whose jalopy that is, but get it out of here because it doesn't belong here." And Barbara going, "No, that's Frank's." He said, "Well, get him out of here. We gotta get going." And you know. And but Barbara, to Scott's point, had a great life career of her own, not only early on, but of course in later years here at the University of Utah through the master's program and helping people involved in substance abuse issues and stuff like that, and helping in counseling and helping people along. And both Frank and Barbara were so intertwined with the idea and the scope and humanity of trying to help other people and trying to see where they could put themselves into a situation to be able to help the next person who needed a little lift. And both of them were equally adept at doing that all throughout their lives.
Well said, Smitty.
Scott, are you able to hang through a break to join us for one more segment? I'll leave that up to you, sir.
Of course. I'm here.
Okay. Well,
anytime.
We will catch a quick break. Scott Layden is with us, son of Frank Layden and longtime high-level NBA executive live in Vegas. We are honoring the life and legacy on the program today of the great Frank Layden, who left us last week at the age of 93. Live Night Events presents the 2025 Granary Live Concert Series, powered by Nightingale College and Murdoch Hyundai, Utah's #1 Hyundai dealer. You can experience outdoor concerts in the heart of downtown Salt Lake's Granary District. Details can be found at ESPN700sports.com. More with Scott Layden and Richard Smith live in studio on a Monday Drive on ESPN 700. All right, welcome back in. Monday edition of The Drive. It's about 93 degrees outside, sunny and hot. Thanks for making us a part of your day. Hope you had a great weekend. We have thrown out our usual rundown to allocate today's time and energy to honoring the life and legacy of Frank Layden, who we lost last week at the age of 93. So we're hoping my own father might stand me up on my own radio show. We're hoping, as Scott Layden is joining us live in Vegas, Richard Smith is live in studio. Both of you know this. My father currently is stuck on the Van Wyck on the way to JFK. So we may get a call from him at some point, Scotty, but I can't guarantee it. So we're a little fluid this segment, gentlemen. Can you guys handle that?
Hey, Scott, how many times have you used the excuse, I'm stuck on the Van Wyck?
Yeah, how about that? But yeah, there's a great episode of Seinfeld when they discuss that, and unless you have grown up in New York, it's hard to imagine, but it is real. It is. It can be. Yeah, it can really lock you up.
Yep.
I have to tell you this, Spence. I've mentioned this to you before, but I think the world of Dave Checketts. I mean, what he did in concert with Larry Miller and my dad, bringing the franchise to a level of professionalism that was amazing. And he would always say, first class or not at all, and we were first class. And I mean, he was a dynamo. I loved working for him in Utah. I loved working for him in New York with that. He had that corner office, and just that what he had on his plate. It was unbelievable what he had going on in New York. And now what I'm getting at is that I was so excited to see him get in the Utah Sports Hall of Fame, which was well deserved. But he should also be in Springfield. I mean, what his impact on the sport of basketball and how good he was, and just how he managed the teams and the team building and getting the right personnel in place. It really he's I would think well deserving of getting to the Basketball Hall of Fame.
Scotty, you spent all these years with the Jazz in the 80s and 90s, and then in 99, summer of 99, you get a phone call from I assume from Dave Checketts about the possibility of maybe going to work for the New York Knicks. Run our listeners through just a little bit where you can tell us about how that process actually took place and how that came about for you.
No, I mean, it was, I don't know. We had made a decision as a family to give that a shot. I talked to my friend, Rick Majerus, who was coaching the Utes at the time, and he said, most men live in quiet desperation without ever taking a chance. And so we had so much success, and I think our family, because we had our four daughters were in grade school, and we took a shot to go there, and we've called that home ever since. Even though I've had jobs elsewhere, we've always kept that as a home base. And when I was a kid, my dad and I were Knick fans, and it was like a dream come true. And then to go back and work again with Dave was special. I wish. As I told him the other night, I said, I just wish it was a little longer, because I think working for him, and I'm going to tell you something, and Spencer, I think you've experienced this when people tell you, everyone loved working for him because it was competitive, it was fast paced, it was intense, but he always had a great temperament, and he had that mental edge to make the place competitive and successful. I mean, and you go right down the list now, Madison Square Garden, the Knicks, Radio City Music Hall, the Rangers, in no particular order. And then the other thing that, and this is like, I was in awe of how he managed all these entities, but we also had the Yankees. Listen to me. The the Garden managed MSG network that had the Yankees on there, and which gave we hired my dad as a consultant, and the Yankees did like the few weeks after we hired my dad, the Yankees were in the World Series, and your dad was nice enough to get what were called the seats. And they were right behind.
Oh, I know the seats. Yeah.
Yes, you know the seats
Oh,
well.
yeah.
Scott, give us the Spike Lee story.
Yeah. But you could reach out because we were right behind the Yankee dugout. You could reach out and touch Joe Torre. That's how good those seats were. And so, as you know, my dad's a bigger baseball fan. Was a bigger baseball fan than anything. So it was Marcia and I, my mom and dad, and about in the fourth or fifth inning, the first baseman Martinez for the Yankees comes off the field, and it was one of these moments where you're just so excited for your dad. You know, it's like you couldn't replicate it. And Dave, I wish he was there to see it, but Martinez comes off the field after a putout, and he's got the ball in his mitt, and he rolls it across the top of the dugout, right to my dad, because he recognized my dad. He rolls it right to my dad. And my dad gets the ball, and it's the World Series, and the ball has a World Series marker on it. And he's studying it. I'm watching him. I'm thinking, oh, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Here's a lifelong baseball fan. Now he's got a World Series ball, you know. And I'm thinking, what's going through his mind? He's studying this ball and like the seams and the logo and everything. So I'm like tickled. I'm so happy, right? And he looks at me and he says, you know what, son? I love Martinez. So, and then. The game goes on. 2 innings later, Martinez comes off the field again after a putout and rolls the ball across the dugout to me. So now I have a World Series ball. And I'm not as affected as my dad was because I like baseball, but I'm not like you and my dad, Smitty. But now I have a ball, and I'm thinking, I don't know. I don't know about this. This is like I just got the Nick job, GM, the whole thing, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't need this attention. Anyway, all of a sudden, Spike Lee, who's sitting, he was not in the seats. He did not have as good a seat. He had pretty good seats. But anyway, he's behind us, and he starts to chant, one ball per family. So I think now I'm panicked. My first public appearance in New York. I'm going to be on
the back page.
As greedy,
Yeah.
He needed the ball for himself. So I turned around with this chant going on, and I saw the little kid who was with his dad, and I tossed him the ball, and then everybody was like, they were okay then. I was all right. But I'll tell you, you asked me before, Spence, about growing up around Frank Layden, and he got the Niagara job when I was 10 years old. So it was 1968, and he went to Niagara, so it was like a lifetime, all time opportunity for him to go coach his old school, and he loved Niagara, and Niagara not too long ago named the court after him, he and my mom. So I was 10 years old, and Syracuse came on the Niagara campus. The Niagara Gymnasium held 2,500 people, and Syracuse obviously was pre-Big East. They come on the campus, and Niagara wins the game. Calvin Murphy, all right, who was number 3 in the country in scoring, it was Maravich, Mount, Murphy, and Calvin averaged 36, Maravich averaged like 44. And Murphy gets 68 in the game. Oof. No three-point line. 68. Yep. And I'm 10 years old. And my dad, they win the game. And so he and I are driving home, and he looks over at me and he says, "You know what, son? This is going to be a lot of fun." And it was like, you see your dad have success. There was nothing like it. And to put it in context, the 68 points, one game, no 3-point line. I scored 57 at St. Francis.
Nice.
So that puts it in context, but it took me 4 years.
I should have let him finish
I knew
the
that was
punchline.
coming.
That's my bad. Scott, first of all, thank you for the kind words about my father. And, I'll let him come on and unpack his thoughts. He loved your father. He loved your father.
Love. I agree. And vice versa, by the way.
Yeah.
Vice versa.
Yeah. I wonder if you could share some insights in that relationship, because you referenced hiring Frank as a consultant back in New York. And, they worked together and my dad was a puppy. Frank could have very easily looked down on this young kid getting this opportunity at the age of 27. But Frank always treated him with respect and always treated him with kindness. Yeah. I wonder if you could shed some insight on that working relationship.
Well, I think your dad came in and infused a professionalism and a business acumen that was desperately needed. That's something that we didn't, we really didn't have. We were run by smart people. Don't get me wrong, but your dad came in with an enthusiasm and just generated and made the Jazz, world renowned. And I think the other thing is, because of the mutual respect that my dad and your father had, that it worked well together. They kind of it blended, and they complemented each other so well, and they had so much respect for each other, and they were able to have success that way. And trust me, these relationships are not always warm and fuzzy, and they're not always it's not kindergarten. This is a competitive world that we were in, but they had so much respect that they could debate, they could argue, they could disagree. But when they all left that room, when everybody left the room, we were unified and together. And that's I'm looking at, and I know your dad appreciates this too, because his alignment when he was involved with franchises was elite. But when you look at the Oklahoma City Thunder, so Mr. Bennett, Sam Presti, Coach Dagnall, and the players, there's an alignment that is unique, special, and it's real. And so I'm not surprised that they have success and that they're able to be patient during that time. Quite frankly, when the Jazz were in that window of the competitive years, that 20 years, there was an alignment that was unique. And was it always easy? No, it wasn't always easy, but it was, Larry Miller, it was Dave Checketts, Frank Layden, Jerry Sloan, Stockton, Malone, Eaton, and the alignment was real. So that when we had we have like a crazy one-off bad playoffs series, you're losing 5 games to the Rockets, and that's that kind of thing where I think we were winning 60 games every year. That you don't waver. And that's not to mean that we didn't have tough conversations, that we didn't figure out how to get better, but we never wavered on, who the coach was, who the important players were, and why were we having success in the regular season, but also then how do we get better, and then eventually we go to the finals twice. But that alignment and that is so unique, and it was unique, and that's why I believe. When you look at, I was fortunate to go and work with the Spurs, who have obviously they're elite at their alignment and that, but they used to talk about all the time. We used to study the Jazz. We used to study and where the success was, why was it successful, and then as they would tell you, not me, as they would tell you that they had the same sort of alignment and would put the same sort of effort into keeping everything consistent and having success day in, day out, but year to year.
Let's go out to the phone lines now and bring in my father, stuck on the Van Wyck. So we have Richard Smith live in studio. We have Scott Layden in Las Vegas, and my father, Dave Checketts, joins us from New York. So I'll try to play traffic cop best I can. Hello, Dad. How are you?
Hi. It's been a great show. I've been listening and happy to join and say hello. And I don't know how I can add anything to what Richard and what Smitty and what Scotty said. Scotty gave the talk of the century at Frank's funeral. He caught his whole life just beautifully, as only a son could. It was I was sitting with the other pallbearers, as you know, and all of us were grabbing for Kleenex because Scott brought him right to life. He recapped his life so beautifully.
I'll ask you the same question to start that I've asked all of our guests that have included, of course, Smitty and Scott. We had Phil Johnson on earlier. We're going to bring in Ron McBride coming up in the 5 o'clock hour. But your thoughts on the life and legacy of Frank Layden. What did Frank Layden mean to you?
Well, he meant everything to me. He when I joined the Jazz in 1983, 27 years old, I had never run a lemonade stand, and Sam Battistone, on the recommendation of David Stern, brought me in and handed the reins to me and said, David told me you'd be able to save this franchise and keep it here, and David told me to give everything to you, and I really did not know all of the steps that we'd have to take to turn into a franchise that wasn't rumored to move, wasn't going to leave Salt Lake, wasn't going to go into bankruptcy, wasn't going to merge with the Denver Nuggets. You can't imagine the time that it was. But the first guy I reached out to was the coach and general manager, Frank Layden. And I'll never forget how he came to the Salt Palace to meet with me on my second day of work. And he came in. He was driving a car that the franchise had given to him to drive. And, here he is, like the head coach, general manager. He's driving this Toyota wagon that looked like it had been trashed, that the dealership of choice had given him. But you know what? His great humility, his great dignity, I came away, I remember coming home, son, and saying to your mom, this guy is incredible. He knows everything about the game. He knows everything about his job. He's just never been given the support and tools here that he needs to really build something special. And that's my job. Give him the money, give him the freedom, give him the ability, instead of drafting players and having to sell them as the Jazz had to do famously. I wanted to give Frank Layden everything he needed to hire the best people, the best coaches, to draft the best players, and we were going to be about winning. And when I said that to him, he said, that is music to my ears. But, he had never said that publicly. He always defended Sam and Sam's willingness to bring the team to Salt Lake. But that became my goal, and we became great partners. In spite of the fact that he'd grown up in New York, I grew up in Utah, in spite of the fact that that I had no experience in the NBA, and he had all this experience. All he showed me my whole life was nothing but loyalty and dignity. He's one of the best people I've ever met, by far. I mean, he had a character about him that was full of goodness. And could he be tough? Yes. He could be tough. And he and I only had one run-in the whole time we worked together, and it was over something stupid that had been said during a game time promotion, and he just let me have it. And I went right back at him, and I said, Frank, look, I know I made a mistake, but we've treated each other with great dignity. And you know what? He apologized like immediately. He just said, I'm so sorry. There were other things on his mind. And all of the rest of the time, through the most difficult moments, especially Adrian Dantley holding out on us and not reporting to camp, and David Falk, his agent, just respecting the team, the franchise, and us. Frank and I were just arm in arm. We were in lockstep. And I really believe, he turned it around because we got him the tools he needed to do it. And, but in terms of what he meant to me, I can't even say. He was the most valuable friend and mentor I could ever imagine in not just in basketball, but in life. Because we talked about life a lot. We talked about raising kids. We talked about how to treat your wife. We talked about character. He loved people of character, and he taught me so very much. And one of this is the last thing I'll say. I don't think there's any way. I didn't have a choice when Larry and I decided we could no longer work together. I didn't have a choice. I had to leave. But I love the NBA, and I got my dream job because the Knicks were the team of my childhood. And Spencer, you know this. I never could have gone to New York and succeeded without having first been prepared by the all-time New Yorker, Frank Layden. He got me ready for what was a really tough job back there. But he taught me so many principles about winning and championship culture and character, and I took it all in. I was just a sponge with him, and it allowed me, I think, to have a decade of success with the Knicks and Madison Square Garden.
Dave, we were talking about some of those qualities of Coach Layden's in an earlier segment with Coach Johnson, and I made the analogy that to me it was a little bit like the recent documentary that came out about Yogi Berra and his granddaughter, who did this film and researched all the information and said that her grandfather was known, as the quote master and the storyteller and all that kind of stuff, but nobody really gave him his due for who he really was as a baseball player, game in and game out, and his numbers over the years and all of that kind of stuff. And when you look at him, his numbers far surpass almost everybody else in baseball during that time, and also as a catcher in the game. And we were saying how that somehow, sometimes came over into how Frank was viewed by the public because he was a funny guy and told stories and did the stuff he did in a public-facing way. But behind the scenes, a lot of people don't know what kind of X and O's tactician he was as a coach, how he was in the front office, how he managed people, and all the things he did to actually run the franchise in the early days when it was teetering, and all the things he had to do to keep all those, if you will, all those plates spinning on top of the on top of the sticks in order none of them fall off, and what great skill he had in doing all of that kind of stuff.
He was amazing, and not only skilled and smart, but so caring and so committed. And I'm not sure he ever, I mean, even though he had those nice accolades, Coach of the Year, Executive of the Year in '84 when we won the Midwest Division title, my first year with the team. So I got spoiled quickly because that just started a run of when we just made the playoffs every year that we were together, Frank and I, and it's because of the job that he did, not just X's and O's, but his leadership, his support, his mentoring. I thought of a funny story, Spencer, that I'll never forget. I was, of course, negotiating player contracts and trying to get players signed as quickly as I could to always get guys into camp and make sure we had the best players on the floor. And I was right in the middle of the Dantley holdout and just so angry about all of that. But there was a time later on, Frank was still coaching, where we were almost done with a contract extension for Mark Eaton, and Mark Eaton's agent, Keith Glass, just wouldn't give up on this one stupid incentive he wanted in Mark's contract. He wanted an incentive that if Mark led the team in rebounding, that he got an extra $25,000. And I went to Coach Layden and I said, okay, Frank, this is the last thing we need to do. If we do this, he'll sign this new 5-year extension. We'll be done with him and we can carry on. And he said, what is it? And I said, he wants a $25,000 bonus if he leads the team in rebounding. And he said, no, I'm not doing that. We're not doing that. Because, that's exactly what we need, is him trying to take rebounds away from whoever's on the other side of the free throw lane so he can add to his numbers. We're just not going to do that. And I said, Frank, come on, it's like $25,000 in a contract that was paying Eaton probably something like $400,000 or $500,000 at the time. And I said, this is all we need to get this done. This thing will be behind us. We'll have him for 5 years. And Frank said, Dave, you know what? This is your deal. You do what you want. But I say no. I'm against it. And so I went back. I had negotiated for so long on this contract that I went back to Keith Glass and I said, Keith, if you tell me this is the very last deal, I'm doing this against my coach's wishes, but I'll do it just to have it behind us. And Keith said, that's the last thing. We have a deal. So we signed the contract, and it was a full 2 years later. It was 2 years after we signed that contract that we're playing in a very tight game at home. I think it was against the Mavericks, and we're at home. And on a certain free throw, I don't remember. I think it was Rolando Blackman shooting a free throw. I can remember the moment like it was yesterday. And he makes the first free throw and misses the second. And Eaton goes up to grab the rebound just as Malone does as well. And neither one of them yielded to the other. And they tipped the ball in. It went in the basket. And Scotty, you remember where I used to sit on the second row, just down from press row? And I see Frank marching toward me. We're in the middle of a game, and I'm sitting with my family, and he comes over and stands right in front of me, and he says, "So Dave, what do you think about your I'll leave out the word. What do you think about your incentive now? He inserted a little expletive in there. What do you think about your blanking incentive now? What do you think about it now? And he stands there like I'm supposed to answer him. And I just am shrugging my shoulders like, I'm so sorry.
Hey, Scott, and Dad, I want to get your insight in this too. You know, Frank did something that really nobody does. And he would joke in later years that if he knew coaches were going to be paid $4, $5, $6 million a year, maybe he would have stuck around. But he retires in 1988, and as the legend goes, he had just been ejected from a game by Earl Strom after getting into a shouting match with Darrell Walker. But he also talked, Scott, about his desire to spend time with Barbara, with your mother, and with the family, and, you know, just kind of live his life a little bit. And, you know, Jerry, of course, takes over, and the rest is history. But, Scott, we'll start with you, then, Dad, we'll go to you on this. Can you shed some insight into exactly what that was like for him to walk away from a team that he had built that was ready to win at a very high level?
I think the probably. I mean, this may be an oversimplification, but I think it was a selfless act at the time. And you know, while I think he had enjoyed coaching, I think he felt good about coaching. He felt good about the team. But I also think he understood where there was a little bit of a tipping point that if we waited too long, we could lose, you know, a great coach in Coach Sloan. And his selflessness, I think, allowed him to step away. And the other thing is, and Dave knows this well because they were really close, is that he had other interests. It did, like, he wasn't beholden to just basketball. He had so many other things that he wanted to do, and he wanted to do with my mom and my brother and sister. So it wasn't like he needed, you know, that's all he could do. He was more of a Renaissance man than not, and he also loved being out in the community and travel, and so I think he was comfortable with where he was and what he had done, and now, you know, it was Jerry's time, and no one was more supportive of Jerry Sloan than my dad, because if you look at Coach Johnson and you look at Coach Sloan as when they were assistants, they were both capable of being head coaches for sure, but both of them were so fiercely loyal. And I tell you, it was a great quality. It was a great lesson for me. They were both fiercely loyal to my dad, and that's what made those relationships work. So when it came time, I think it was easy for my dad to say, you know what, this is Jerry's time. So,
Dad, we'll go over to you. I wonder, you know, when Frank came to you with that decision, what that was like, and how eventually it went from Frank to Jerry.
It happened over quite a long period of time. Right after training camp that season, he started to make noise like that. When I would talk to him, he'd say, Dave, I don't know if I can do this. And we had, keep in mind that I think our coming out party was at the end of the 87-88 season, when we played the Lakers in a 7-game series. They would go on to win the championship, but we played them in a very tough 7-game series. And actually, when we came home for Game 6, we blew them out like 106-80 on our floor and set up a big Game 7, which we lost in L.A. But I was surprised because he started making noise right after training camp about, I hate getting on airplanes, I hate all the travel, I hate the hotel rooms. All of a sudden he said, it's just gotten old for me. And I said, but Frank, we finally have a team. we finally have a team that can do something really special. I mean, really special. You saw what we did with the world champs last year. This year could be better. We should be better. And don't you want to stick around to enjoy it? But he said he would keep saying, I just don't have it. I just don't feel it. But all these years later, I have concluded that there was something else at play with him. And he'll never confirm this. He would never acknowledge it, even though I pushed him over the years to say, I know what was up with you then. And what was up was he did not want if he stepped down, he wanted Larry and me to have no choice. He wanted it to be Jerry Sloan. And the best way to do that would be to resign mid-season. Because, I mean, we're not going to conduct a search then and select somebody else. I wouldn't have anyway. But Larry always talked about, if Frank ever steps down, we're going to have to do a search. And I knew, I think we all knew that Jerry, even though he'd been fired in Chicago, we knew he was a great coach and a person of great character. I think Frank did that totally to force our hand. I've never said this publicly, but I think he did it totally to force our hand to make sure that this guy who had been so loyal to him and was so ready for the job got the job.
And as I remember that, Dave, if my memory serves me correct, I think we had a game in the Salt Palace on a Wednesday night. It came in Thursday morning, announced to the team that he was stepping down immediately as the head coach, and Jerry was running practice that morning, and Jerry ran the practice, and then the team got on a flight that afternoon. I think it was to go to Dallas for a game Friday night, and it was just as you say, it was just like, we don't have any time to do anything else. This is what we have to do. We have to do this thing, and because we got a game tomorrow night.
Yeah, and all of us had agreed the night before that that's what we would do. And Larry came in too. Larry Miller walked into the dressing room and we let Frank announce that he was stepping aside and that Jerry was going to take over. And then Larry said, I want to just say one thing. And he looked at the mailman. I remember him giving the mailman that death stare. And he gave him this look, and he said, this was Frank's decision, and only Frank. Nobody else had anything to do with this. This is totally his decision, because Larry thought the players would think that he had pushed Frank out. He wanted the players to know, and this was true. It was totally Frank.
We're chatting with Scott Layden live in Vegas, Dave Checketts live in New York, Richard Smith live in Salt Lake City. I know both of you have to go, so we'll end with this. And Scott, we'll start with you, and then Dad, we'll go to you. I wonder whether it's pearls of wisdom, pieces of advice, funny sayings, and I know there's a lot there. If you could share any of the great lessons you learned from Frank before I set both of you loose. Scott, we'll start with you.
Oh, there were many. I hasten to do this, but I said this the other night or the other day at during the eulogy. He had all these things, and they were coming at us constantly. Words of advice. Whenever you go in a restaurant, immediately go in the bathroom because whoever cleans the bathroom cleans the kitchen. Always leave a place better than you found it. Now, clearly, Utah, Salt Lake City, the Jazz were better than he found it when he left.
For sure.
Never refuse a breath mint. That's sound advice.
No.
And then my favorite, and this is where I'm nervous, but I'm going to say it anyway. Never trust a man with two first names. So I said, Dad, what? I don't understand. What do you mean by that? He said, well, think about it, son. Mike Lee, Lindsey Graham, Paul Ryan. He said, oh, my God, my daughter is my speechwriter. So he said, I'm not a member of any organized political party. I'm a Democrat.
That's right.
In today's day and age, it's so poignant.
Yeah.
But during the last several months, I can't tell you how many nurses came into his room and they said, Coach, thank you so much. You're the only room in the hospital that has Rachel Maddow and MSNBC on. I'll leave it there.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, not at all.
I got to tell you something, because I worked with Smitty. I worked with Spencer when he was a young man. I just can't get over that intern that worked for me is now this radio. I don't know. You're a dynamo. I just can't get over what. You're like, no, I can't even believe you're the same person. And then I'm telling you, and I told him the other night, I loved working for Dave Checketts, because every day was competitive, it was intense, and we were focused on winning it all. And I appreciate the opportunity to have worked with you guys and obviously work with my dad. So thank you.
Thank you for those words, Scott. Dad, we'll end with you.
Well, Scotty, the opposite is true. You were just a joy always to work with, and to see you work with your dad. Everything from the lucky ties, to all everything we did to try and win. My favorite thoughts from Frank, I'll just offer up two. I know he said never trust a man with two names. But he had this other thing, Scott. He said, never trust a man with a beard. He's hiding something.
He's got something to hide. That's right.
He's hiding something. And he meant it. He absolutely meant it. Never trust a man with a beard. But this was one of his favorite sayings, and this is why I think he ran out of gas with the Jazz. I think this had something to do with it, and he resigned too early. But he always said, it's better to surprise than disappoint.
Yeah.
And that was one of his favorite sayings. And you know what? The Jazz, under Frank, had started surprising people in that 83-84 season. And in that 88 season, we had played the Lakers to a standstill. I mean, they had to dig deep. We were the best team they played that year. And they went all the way to winning a title. And Frank knew that young team had come of age, and he just didn't love being in a situation where there was only downside. He loved being in a situation where there was only upside, because he knew he could surprise people. He knew his team could surprise people. And suddenly, instead of the underdog, the lovable underdog, the Jazz had become a real force in the NBA.
Well, Dave and Scott.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Smitty.
No, I was just going to.
I love him. I'll miss him, and love the whole Layden family.
I was just going to add just a little anecdote. Dave and Scott, I remember Frank. Scott, when Scott first got to New York and got situated and brought Frank in, and Frank came home from the first visit in New York, and I'm visiting with him. We're out to dinner, and he said, "Hey, look at this." And he takes out his key ring, and he shows me. And I said, "What is that, Coach?" He goes, "See this key right here?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "That's the key for Madison Square Garden." And I said, "For the Garden?" He goes, "Yeah, they gave me the key to the Garden. This opens every door in the Garden." and he just had this twinkle in his eye, like, I've gotten right to the top, right now I'm at the pinnacle. This is it. I got a key to the Garden. I can get in any door I want. and and he was so proud of that and was so excited to show me that he had the key. It was funny.
Scotty, Dad, we'll set you loose. We can't thank you enough. I know you both have things to do, so this has been awesome. Travel safe, and we'll chat soon, okay?
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Scott Layden.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Scott, bye, Dad. Scott Layden, live in Vegas. Dave Checketts, live in New York. Richard Smith, live in Salt Lake. We still have more to do, even though it feels like we've done a lot. The former head coach of the Utah football team, Ron McBride, via Smitty, requested to come on today. And when Ron McBride asked to come on a radio show, you come on a radio show. He's in Hawaii conducting a football camp, but he and Frank were very close. So we'll bring him on in the 5 o'clock hour. We'll say goodnight at 6 on a Monday edition of The Drive. We've thrown out we've thrown out the rundown today, and the entire show has been allocated to honoring the life and legacy of the great Frank Layden, who left us last week at the age of 93. More coming up on the other side right here on ESPN 700. Great Frank Layden, who passed away last week at the age of 93. Phil Johnson, Scott Layden, Dave Checketts, Richard Smith has been good enough to be my wingman today, live in studio. We're going to get Ryan from the Dish Pros here before we catch a break. But Smitty, anything specific strike you about the program today so far?
Well, it's just that all the gentlemen we've talked to, Scott Layden, Dave Checketts, Phil Johnson, there's a common theme about just the personality and the common respect that Frank had for everybody that he worked with and the way that he treated people, and that's always a symbiotic relationship that you have with people. Like, if you give that out, you're more than likely going to get that back, and that's what made him so successful in all the dealings he had, not just in basketball but off the court, just in life in general.
We'll catch a break to bring in Coach Mack coming up on the other side, but before we do that, Ryan from the Dish Professionals, get a hold of him at 801-424-DISH. Save a bunch of money on a bunch of different things. What's going on, Ryan?
Definitely. Save money, get all your games, have it set up so your DVR automatically records them for you. Guys, nothing's better than Dish right now. They've got this awesome 2-year promotion, and we have the extra offer on top of it where you get 3 months of service for free. So listen, you got cable, DirecTV, you got the oversized bill. Guys, it's going to be a minimum $30 a month cheaper. Plus, you get 3 months of it free. You get a better, bigger system. Integrate all the streaming apps into the system with one remote. We'll come out and have it installed for you for free and throw in dinner at JCW's on top of everything. Guys, this is the opportunity you've been waiting for. Pick up the phone now. Call us. Get set up. Also ask about our internet solutions. Really, honestly, we should be called the Internet Pros now because I have pretty much every single internet provider available at my fingertips. I can tell you what's available. Even the companies you would probably least likely think that I could set you up with, which is some of my biggest competitors, call us and we can help you get the best price, the best deal. Packages start as low as $19.99 a month. And so listen, you're spending $70, $80, $90 a month for internet. It's easy. 424-DISH. Call us now. 801-424-DISH.
All right, there he is, Ron from the Dish Pros. We'll catch a break. Ron McBride joins us coming up on the other side right here on ESPN 700. Studio live in Salt Lake. Now we go across the ocean to The Rock, where the great Ron McBride is good enough to give us some time on a Monday afternoon. Coach Mac, how are you, sir?
Good. How you guys doing?
We're good. We're good. I'll just ask you the same question I've asked all my guests. What was it like to be Frank Layden's friend?
Oh man, he was special, and I'll tell you the number of things and favors he did for me over the last 30 years are just unbelievable. Because whenever you call him for something, he always said, "No problem, I got you." And even when he struggled a lot, he still showed up. And I think in the last 10 years, we had 23 events, and he showed up for 21 of them. And the only ones he did show up was this year because he unfortunately was on a huge decline.
Coach, it's really nice of you to take a few minutes to visit with us about Frank today. Tell us about the unique relationship that you two had, because I've been fortunate to be around you guys in some public settings and also private get-togethers, and you guys always just seem to have a unique special bond that goes beyond sports, but was more of just a personal thing involving just how you felt about each other.
Well, it was a personal thing, and we did a lot together. We had dinners together, events together, games together. I can't tell you how many times he spoke to my football teams, and was an awesome pregame speaker and funny, and just he had a way of reaching every situation. Then he had a way of just, okay, what do you got to get across there? What do you need to say? And then I'd say, Frank, if you would cover this and this and this, and then you give him ideas, and then he would just take it from there. He was funny, and he was passionate, and he was, he was everything you could ask in a person. He just was, and we had a great relationship probably from day one. I can remember the first time when the Jazz came here, and I said, "Who's the guy who makes all the decisions?" They said, "Well, a guy named Frank Layden." I said, "Well, I need to get a hold of him. I need to see if we can buy some tickets for some recruits we have coming in, and to see whether." So I called. So I called him, and he got on the phone, and we're talking and yucking it up. And I said, "Look," I said, I got a few guys." He said, "Okay, how many tickets do you need?" I said, "Well, we could use around 30. And he says, "What time can you be here?" And I said, "Look." And from that time on, we became great friends, and that spans a long time, and he always, it didn't matter what the community asked him for, he always did it. Didn't matter what, he was great with the team. He was great with the players. He was great with my players. You couldn't ask for a better person. And him passing leaves a huge void in my life, because I was very dependent on seeing him, and he's just one of those unique people, that you come across in your lifetime.
Well, I know, Coach, you and Vicky were some of the last people to be able to visit with him, and I know you guys had such a close bond, with the Layden family, and And it's just so heartwarming to see that how you guys always interacted with each other.
I mean, so I had, I forget what, the night he passed away, I had been doing something pretty much all day, and when I got home, I said to Vicky and Kelly, I said, we need to go over and see Frank because I don't think he's doing well. I don't know what. So my daughter Kelly said, okay, you guys get in the car. I'll drive you up, and I could tell that he was not going to make it. It was just heartbreaking because he fought this for a long time, and but you could tell he was satisfied with what he did in this life.
No.
Coach, I've been asking people this question all day, and of course, most people know Frank as a great coach and a very funny personality. But upon his passing, he and Barbara were married 68 years. I wonder what sort of insight you have as far as your friendship with them as a couple and Frank as a husband.
Well, we did a lot of things with them as we go out to eat quite a bit, and Vicky would have lunch with Barbara and a group of ladies. They usually meet, once or twice a month, and Vicky and Barbara were real close, and then of course we had the old timers lunch, that Denny Dunn had put together, and that was, and I'd always show up a little bit late, and I would always stay afterwards, and that's when we'd have our real conversations after lunch was over and kind of everybody was gone, and then Smitty would stay. Frank would be there, I would be there, and then we'd get down to serious business of what was going on. He loved to talk baseball. He was a baseball fanatic. Loved to talk about his hometown, and his love for Barbara was just unique. They had such a great relationship, and how much he depended on her, and it just was, I don't know what to say except I know that it leaves a huge void, and he was a huge supporter of my foundation for kids, and he was always great with that, and he, just anything you want, and a very intelligent man, just as far as, anything about, you talk anything about sports and politics, he was fun to talk to about politics. He and my wife were on the same wavelength, and on politics. So that was always an interesting conversation between Vicky and Frank about, today's world, about what was going on, and he had opinions and she had opinions, but it was. What can you say? This guy was ever day one since the Jazz came here. When I got to know him, we were instant. We had an instant connection, and if I could ever do anything for him or he needed me for something, I was always glad to do it. But his favorite saying all the time was, in closing a phone call or when you're getting ready to leaving, or what can I do for you? That was his say, well, just let me know what I can do for you. And I said, you don't need to do anything for me. Well, make sure if you need something, just tell me and I'll do it. And I can remember Smitty would bring him to events, and he'd say, "Well, I don't know how long I can stay, but I'll stay until you say I can go." You know, I said, "Hey, you go, yeah, you go whenever you want to go." But he'd hang and he'd hang and hang, and he'd be there and just talk. He'd greet everybody when they came in, and you know, he gave up his time, and he loved to talk to people. He was a great communicator. You know, had a great belief in the Jazz. You know, and obviously they drafted some great players during his time, and they were able to develop these guys and you know, make this a great product. And you know, and with the advent of John and Carl and Jeff and that group, you know, that was a special group of players here.
Now, Coach, shifting gears for just a second, we need to publicly congratulate you on your selection to be inducted into the Utah Ring of Honor at the University of Utah. Congratulations. Tell us a little bit about that, about your how you got the phone call, how you found out about that.
We were at a event, you know, for and I think it was our you know, our golf tournament. Then we had a deal on Friday night, so Mark Harlan had called Vicky and said, "Make sure the coach is on time." And I'm thinking, why is the athletic director at Utah worried about if I'm on time to this event? And then I get home and Vicky says, "We have to be on time for this event." I said, "Why?" She said, "I have no idea." I thought, well, maybe they're going to take my tickets away from me or something. I didn't know, you know. So then Mark said, "Hey, I'd like to make an announcement." You know, I'm thinking, oh my God, what's this going to be? And he says that you know, Coach Mack's going into the Ring of Honor, and I was just so, you know, just excited about it and appreciative and appreciative particularly to the players that played for me and the families that built, you know, what's there today and the players and, you know, and so we had a vision a long time ago of what this place could be, and the vision is still right there, you know, and Kyle obviously has done a great job and to take it to the next step, and he's hired the right people, and he got, you know, a great, you know, most of this defensive staff had played at Utah, and then he just hired the new offensive coordinator, the new running back coach, Jake Kukas, and you know, so they got a lot of people that I know quite well that are working for him, and they're all happy, and they don't want to go anyplace else, and they're committed to what Kyle's vision is at the University of Utah.
Well, Coach Mack, thank you so much for your time on this very special day. We will set you loose. Enjoy Hawaii and safe travels, sir, okay?
Okay, I would like to say in closing that how much I love Frank and how much I miss him. And he was a real guy, you know. And Smitty, what you did for him in the last 12 years, 13 years of taking care of him, being his sidekick, being there all the time. I can't tell you how much all of us appreciate what you did for him, especially through the tough times. And that's what tells you a lot about people, is what you do when somebody can't do something for you. And Smitty, thank you for giving of yourself and caring about Frank.
Very kind of you, Coach. Thank you for those nice words.
Thank you, Coach. Safe travel, sir.
Oh, okay. Have a good day, you guys.
Thanks, man.
The great Ron
Thanks,
McBride. And Smitty asking the great question, will be inducted into the Utah Ring of Honor, which is very well deserved. We'll catch a quick break. More coming up on the other side of a Monday edition of The Drive, honoring the life and legacy of Frank Layden right here on ESPN 700. I wasn't sure if we were going to be able to find that, and I don't know whether to laugh or cry, to be honest with you, Smitty. That was Porter. When was that? 2 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, I think spring of 2023.
Yeah.
When
so
Frank
that,
joined
of
us.
course, was the great Frank Layden, who was a consistent guest on this program throughout the course of this program and others throughout the course of my career. Frank has been so good to me, not just in my career, but in my life. And so I am sad to say goodbye. I am grateful that he is not suffering anymore, and I have so many wonderful memories ever since I was just a little kid, Smitty. I can't imagine what's going through your head right now. So as we wrap it up, Penny, for your thoughts as you hear Frank sing a little Frank Sinatra to wrap up the show today.
Oh, that was so apropos. And I'll tell you what, he wouldn't want you to be shedding a tear at all. He'd want you to be laughing.
Sure.
And, you know, make some kind of comment like, "Really? Are you really trying to sing right now on the public airwaves and whatever?" And but he was truly, as I've said to many people over the last several days, he's truly, from my perspective, in my opinion, one of a kind. But he was one of a kind in the best type of way. It's hard to everybody says, "Oh, there'll be never be another one like that," and in any sport or something or whatever. But you hope that there's many more Frank Layden's around somewhere, because that just makes life better for everybody who's around people like that. And I know that would be a sentiment he would want to share, is that everybody celebrate and everybody have fun and enjoy the people around you and take care of them the best way that you can.
Well, thank you so much. This show today would not have happened without you. And as Coach Max said earlier, you were omnipresent in Frank's life over the past decade plus, helping a lot, Smitty. So a lot of people around him owe you a lot.
No, just trying to be a friend, trying to repay whatever. You can never, anything you do in those kind of situations, Spence, I truly believe that you always end up getting more than you give. And Frank gave me so much, and I was honored and privileged and humbled to be able to call him a friend of mine, and we surely will miss him, but we'll try to celebrate him all the time whenever we can.
In honor of Frank Layden, coming up on the other side is the Major League Baseball Home Run Derby, which Frank would probably want to follow the show. Porter, great job today. Way to put a cherry on top of that Sunday with that final bump. Before we say goodnight, what comes our way to Tuesday edition of the show?
Yeah, man, on a Tuesday show. A little more remembering one Frank Layden. Grant Harrison will stop by the show. Tim McMahon stops by the show. Bill Riley, Dave Fox, a loaded Tuesday show. And yeah, just to echo your guys' sentiments, all of you worked with Frank in like a professional setting. You knew him for decades and decades. So that feeling is very present and forward. For me, I cleaned Frank's golf clubs every once in a while. He came up to Park City golf courses with all his friends, all their New York accents, and they all gave me crap all the time. That was how they approached life. But Frank specifically made me feel like I had been his friend for a long time, and I had never met him. And I know that that's how he made like everyone he ever met feel. So just a little more perspective that I know like 1,000 fans also shared with one, frankly.
Well said, and we will say goodnight. Special thank you, Phil Johnson, Scott Layden, Dave Checketts, Ron McBride, the incomparable Richard Smith. My name is Spence Checketts saying goodnight. I loved Frank Layden, and I will miss him. Enjoy your Monday evening. Home Run Derby is next. We'll talk to you on a Tuesday drive. As always, you can catch it right here on ESPN 700.